Hello, everyone. We will regularly bring you stories you like. John Miller was driving home, his heart filled with excitement. He had ended his business trip early to surprise his wife, Emily. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden hue over the city, and John felt a sense of contentment as he navigated through the familiar streets of their upscale neighborhood. He imagined Emily's surprised and delighted expression when she saw him walk through the door earlier than expected. As he pulled into the driveway of their modern suburban home, John noticed that Emily's car was parked in its usual spot. He stepped out of the car, taking a moment to appreciate the well-manicured lawn and the blooming flowers that Emily had so lovingly tended. Everything seemed perfect, yet a nagging feeling tugged at the back of his mind. John entered the house, expecting to be greeted by the familiar warmth and coziness of their home. However, an eerie silence filled the air. The living room was neat and tidy, with no sign of Emily or their young son, Ethan. "Emily?" John called out, but there was no response. He checked the kitchen, the dining room, and finally made his way upstairs, but the house remained quiet. "She must have gone out with Ethan," John muttered to himself, trying to brush off the uneasy feeling. He walked into the kitchen, intending to grab a glass of water. As he opened the trash can to throw away the empty bottle, a used condom caught his eye. John's heart sank. He stood frozen, staring at the condom, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. He picked it up with trembling hands, inspecting it closely, and there was no doubt left in his mind. It was used. "This can't be happening," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind, each more painful than the last. He tried to rationalize it, to find some innocent explanation, but nothing made sense. The weight of betrayal settled heavily on his chest. John took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions brewing inside him. He knew he couldn't confront Emily without more evidence. He needed to know the full extent of what was happening behind his back. Determined to uncover the truth, he resolved to take matters into his own hands. To confirm his suspicions, John installed hidden cameras in the bedroom and living room. He went about his daily routine, but his mind was constantly plagued by anxiety. Each night, he would review the footage, searching for any signs of infidelity. John's workdays became a blur of meetings and reports, but his thoughts were always elsewhere. He found it difficult to concentrate, his mind replaying the moment he discovered the condom over and over again. He kept telling himself that he needed to stay calm, to be patient until he had definitive proof. One weekend, John told Emily he had urgent work at the office and left the house early. From his office, he monitored the cameras on his phone, waiting for the moment of truth. Hours passed, and finally, he saw Emily bringing a man into the house. John's heart pounded as he recognized the man, James Smith, a manager at one of his company's subsidiary firms. The sight of Emily and James together was like a dagger to his heart. "Emily, how could you?" John whispered, watching the intimate scene unfold on the screen. James and Emily were making out on the dining table. John's heart felt like it was being torn apart, but he remained silent, determined to stay composed. James leaned in closer, whispering something in Emily's ear that made her giggle. They moved to the living room, oblivious to the cameras capturing their every move. John's hands clenched into fists as he watched them kiss passionately, their bodies pressed tightly together. He felt a surge of anger and betrayal, but also a strange sense of detachment. It was as if he were watching a movie, unable to intervene or change the outcome. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. How long had this been going on? How could Emily do this to him? The hours dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, James left the house, leaving Emily alone. John continued to watch as Emily cleaned up, her demeanor completely unchanged. She showed no signs of guilt or remorse, which only fueled John's anger further. John spent the rest of the night replaying the footage, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He knew he needed to confront Emily, but he also knew he needed to be careful. He couldn't afford to let his anger get the best of him. He needed to think rationally, to plan his next steps carefully. John began secretly investigating James's identity and discovered that he was not only the manager of his subsidiary company, but also had a beautiful wife named Sarah. John decided to use his position and resources to plot his revenge. He organized a grand party under the guise of rewarding the subsidiary company, inviting all employees and their families. The preparations for the party took weeks, and John meticulously planned every detail. He wanted everything to be perfect, to ensure that his plan went off without a hitch. At the party, John greeted his guests with a warm smile, but his eyes were constantly scanning the room, looking for James and Sarah. Finally, he spotted them. James looked dashing in his suit, and Sarah was radiant in a flowing dress. John felt a pang of jealousy as he watched them, but he quickly pushed it aside. John politely shook hands with James and took note of his wife, Sarah. Throughout the evening, John orchestrated opportunities to be alone with Sarah while his men ensured James was heavily intoxicated. He watched as James stumbled around, laughing and joking with his colleagues, completely unaware of what was happening. John displayed his charm and sophistication in his conversations with Sarah, gradually winning her over. He complimented her dress, made her laugh with witty remarks, and listened intently as she talked about her life. He could see the attraction in her eyes, the way she leaned in closer as they spoke. "You're quite the charmer, John," Sarah said with a playful smile. "I can see why Emily married you." "Thank you, Sarah. And you're quite stunning yourself," John replied, his voice smooth and confident. "James is a lucky man." Sarah blushed, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "You're too kind, John. It's not often I meet someone who appreciates a good conversation." John continued to engage Sarah in conversation, steering the topic towards more personal matters. He asked about her interests, her hobbies, and her dreams. He could see the walls she had built around herself slowly crumbling, her defenses weakening. As the night wore on, John's plan began to take shape. He knew he had Sarah's interest, and he knew he could use that to his advantage. He just needed to be patient to play his cards right. After the party, John successfully lured Sarah to his hotel room. They talked and laughed, both letting their guards down. Recalling the scenes he had seen on his cameras, John felt a surge of vengeful satisfaction. "You really are a charming man," Sarah said, her eyes glinting with desire as she sipped her wine. "Thank you. You're quite stunning yourself," John replied, leaning in to kiss her passionately. They fell onto the bed, Sarah's hands exploring John's back as she surrendered completely. John's emotions were a turbulent mix of satisfaction and guilt. Part of him reveled in his revenge, while another part felt remorseful for what he was about to do. Nevertheless, he pressed on, driven by his need to balance the pain in his heart. They made love fervently, changing positions numerous times until both were utterly exhausted. Sarah, breathless and flushed, whispered, "You're incredible. I've never experienced anything like this." John felt a cold emptiness creep into his heart at her words. He knew that what they shared wasn't love, but a means to an end. Despite the fleeting satisfaction, he continued, needing to purge his pain. As they lay there, spent and silent, John's mind wandered back to the images of Emily and James. He felt a twisted sense of justice in what he had done, yet he also recognized the hollow victory it represented. This act of revenge had not erased the hurt or the betrayal. It had merely masked it with another layer of pain. The next morning, John watched Sarah leave the hotel with a smile, his heart filled with a twisted sense of triumph. He resolved to return home and confront Emily. On his way back, John reflected on the previous night, feeling both a sense of achievement and a profound emptiness. He knew his actions, while momentarily gratifying, hadn't truly healed his wounds. John returned home with a mix of anticipation and dread. He knew that the confrontation with Emily would be inevitable and potentially explosive. As he stepped through the front door, the house seemed quieter than usual, the weight of the impending conversation hanging in the air. Back home, John decided it was time to confront Emily. He entered the house, finding her in the kitchen making breakfast. Emily looked surprised to see him. "John, you're back early. What's going on?" John didn't answer her question. Instead, he said, "Emily, we need to talk." Emily felt a wave of unease but approached him, asking, "What's wrong?" Taking a deep breath, John coldly said, "I know about you and James. I've seen everything." Emily's face went pale. She tried to explain, "John, it was just a mistake." John cut her off. "A mistake? Do you think I don't know anything? I saw you with him in our home. I've been holding back, waiting for the right moment to exact my revenge." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "John, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you." "Never meant." John's voice was icy. "Sorry doesn't cut it. Last night, I was with James's wife. Did you know that? I got my revenge on both of you." Emily collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down her face. She hadn't realized that her betrayal had not only destroyed their marriage, but had also driven her husband to such painful measures. "John, why did you do this?" Emily sobbed, her body shaking. John's voice was calm and steady. "Because I couldn't bear the feeling of being betrayed. You hurt me, so I made sure you felt the same pain." Emily, tears flowing, tried to plead, "John, I truly love you. I know I made a terrible mistake. Please give me another chance." John shook his head. "Another chance? There are no more chances. Our marriage is over. I can't trust you anymore." Emily knew it was too late to make amends. She hugged her knees, crying uncontrollably. John watched her, feeling a mix of satisfaction and deep sorrow. He knew their marriage was beyond repair. "Emily, it's over. I hope you can move on and learn from this," John said, then turned and walked out, leaving Emily sobbing alone in the house. John walked down the street, feeling a sense of relief but also an overwhelming emptiness. He realized that while his revenge had been executed, it hadn't truly healed his pain. He decided to move on and find true happiness in his life. The next few days were a blur for John. He packed his belongings and moved into a hotel temporarily. The separation from Emily and Ethan was painful, but he knew it was necessary for his own sanity. He couldn't stay in a place filled with so many painful memories. John threw himself into his work, using it as a distraction from the turmoil in his personal life. He spent long hours at the office, avoiding social interactions and immersing himself in projects. His colleagues noticed the change in him, but no one dared to ask what was wrong. One evening, as John sat alone in his hotel room, he received a message from Sarah. She wanted to meet and talk. John hesitated, unsure if he wanted to reopen that chapter of his life, but eventually agreed. They met at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes. "John, I just wanted to say I'm sorry," Sarah began, her voice filled with genuine remorse. I didn't know about your situation with Emily. If I had known— It's not your fault, Sarah, John replied, his tone softer than it had been with Emily. You were just caught in the crossfire of something you didn't understand. Sarah reached across the table and took John's hand. If there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. John nodded, appreciating her sincerity. They talked for hours, sharing their stories and finding solace in each other's company. For the first time in weeks, John felt a glimmer of hope. 3 years later, John was walking in the park when he ran into Emily. She looked worn and haggard, and she approached him hesitantly. John, I've always wanted to know, why were you so adamant about the divorce? We were so happy. Why couldn't you forgive me? Emily asked, tears welling in her eyes. John calmly told her everything, including how he had discovered her affair with James and his subsequent actions. That night, I saw you two in our home. I held back my anger and plotted my revenge, John said, his voice filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. Emily, hearing this, collapsed to the ground, tears streaming down her face. She hadn't realized that her betrayal had led to such extreme measures by her husband. I'm so sorry, John. I'm truly sorry. Emily sobbed, completely breaking down. John looked at her, feeling a mix of vengeful satisfaction and deep emptiness. He knew their marriage could never be restored. Emily, it's all in the past now. I hope you can start anew and learn from this, John said, then turned and walked away. John continued his walk through the park, reflecting on the past 3 years. He had found some measure of peace in his life, though the scars of betrayal and revenge remained. He had reconnected with old friends, started new hobbies, and even opened himself up to the possibility of new relationships. One day, while at a business conference, he met Laura, a bright and ambitious woman who shared many of his interests. They hit it off immediately, and their relationship blossomed into something meaningful. John found himself smiling more, feeling lighter as the days went by. Meanwhile, Emily struggled to rebuild her life. The divorce had left her devastated, and she had to confront the consequences of her actions. She sought therapy, trying to understand why she had strayed and how she could move forward. Over time, she began to find strength in her independence and focused on being the best mother she could be for Ethan. If you like our stories, please subscribe to our channel so that I can push better stories to